Welcome to the fourth IFPMA media briefing on COVID. Today we're going to focus on therapeutics in the pipeline, clinical trials happening across the world, and plans to ramp up production capacities and access. Vaccines are a long-term solution. We will always need effective treatments. Journalists, please start writing your questions now in the chat box. Say who you are and who you would like to answer the question. We have a superb global lineup of CEOs from the biopharmaceutical industry with us today. Let me introduce them. We have Dave Ricks, Chairman and CEO of Eli Lilly and President of IFPMA. Dr. Severin Schwan, CEO and Vice President of IFPMA and CEO of the Roche Group. We have Dr. Albert Bourla, who is the Chairman and CEO of Pfizer. We have Ken Frazier, Chairman of the Board and CEO of MSD. And we have Dan O'Day, Chairman of the Board of Directors and CEO of Gilead. Welcome, gentlemen. In the studio with me here in Geneva, we have the Director General of the IFPMA, Thomas Cueni. The IFPMA is the organization that represents the pharmaceutical industry at the WHO and at the UN in general. Thomas, tell us, first of all, what is the state of play of the treatments that are being researched and developed at the moment for COVID-19?
Claire, as you said at the beginning, where vaccines may be the best hope to end the pandemic, we do need effective treatments. And when I look at where we have come in 7 months since the pandemic started, we have come quite a long way, but we have to honestly admit some hopes were dashed, some hopes were fulfilled, and there's more hope to come. There are 3 main avenues, and we will hear from our industry leaders today on all of them. It is about antivirals, it is about antibodies, and it is about anti-inflammatories. What we have learned also is we are still in a learning curve. Most likely, there will not be a single effective treatment. There will not be the magic bullet to tackle and contain COVID-19. We will need different treatments for different patient groups, for different stages of disease. But I think the industry is still all in, and we have come a long way since this started.
Thomas, let's hear from the industry then about the treatments, where we are with research and development and innovation and specific clinical trials. If I may start then with Dan O'Day of Gilead. Your product, remdesivir, it's an antiviral and it's one of the few treatments that has been authorized for use so far. Could you briefly explain to us how it works and how come that you got it off the ground so fast?
Yes, of course. So good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with my colleagues. Let me just first say that it's a real privilege to be a part of the industry at this time, to see the level of investment across our companies, even collaborating together to make a difference for this virus. We have a long way to go. But I'm really privileged to have worked with colleagues at Gilead. That I think it's important to note that this is not something that remdesivir in particular that came about in a short time frame. This is as a result of decades of investment in research, and very importantly, at Gilead in antiviral research. In fact, remdesivir is a story that started about 10 years ago. Due to our investments in emerging viruses, we saw that remdesivir had some effect on other viruses in this family of coronaviruses, SARS and MERS in the lab. And that level of investment and preparedness allowed us to move very, very quickly. Claire, to your question, I mean, the way that remdesivir works, back to Thomas's statement, it's an antiviral. It's one of a number of mechanisms that we believe will have an impact upon this devastating disease. And what remdesivir specifically does is it inhibits the ability for the virus to replicate. What we did, in a very short period of time in January is move rapidly as soon as we knew of COVID-19 to put this into a suite of clinical trials that were designed to answer different questions. And I'm very pleased to say that we now have the results of 3 very robust randomized trials. By the way, there are 36 other trials ongoing right now, but 3 trials, very consistent results that show for severe patients, these are hospitalized patients, this is an IV medicine, it's administered in the acute care setting at this point in time, that we saw significant reduction in an improvement in clinical symptoms, a reduction in hospital stays. Patients are getting out of the hospital sooner. And we also saw, as we compared to real-world data, a difference in an improvement in mortality. More trials will be reading out, including the final cut of the trial that we participated in with the NIH, which will provide us even more color on this important medicine. It has now been approved or allowed for use in more than 50 countries. And importantly, and I'm sure we'll get to this, long before we knew remdesivir was going to be successful, we began investing not only in the clinical trial program, working with partners around the world, and including some of the colleagues here today, to find a way to ramp up the supply, because we knew that if this medicine in these extraordinary times was going to work, we had to be prepared. And this is a complex supply chain, so we invested significantly in that to be prepared. And we made a lot of progress, and looking forward to speaking more about that.
Certainly, indeed, because it's all very well developing the treatments, but it's about manufacturing enough and getting them to the people in need. And certainly we'll come back to your twin approach of how you were working in parallel with the development and also the production. Just a question to you, because you say, of course, you've done these clinical trials which have got authorization. There's ongoing clinical trials. Can you tell us anything about the ongoing clinical trials and also about recruiting patients? How easy is it to recruit patients for these trials?
Yes, so we have follow-up to those 3 randomized, by the way, they've all been peer-reviewed, published at this stage as well, clinical trials. We continue to follow patients in those trials to see the longer-term effects. But as I said, in addition, we have about 36 additional trials. They fall into a variety of categories. Now that we know that remdesivir has such an impact on hospitalized patients as a standalone agent, we've also collaborated, again, with companies that are represented here today to look to see if we can have a combination approach to get an even stronger effect and a more durable effect even for patients. This is, as most of us know, characteristic with viral diseases. Certainly HIV and other diseases, hepatitis C, we've seen that at times when you combine an antiviral medicine with other antivirals or other mechanisms, you can have an even greater impact for patients and society. So we have a category of studies that are looking at remdesivir in combination with other medicines to increase that. And then we have, because of the impact that we've seen with remdesivir in getting patients out of the hospital sooner, which has a major, of course, benefit for patients, but also a societal benefit. We know that our hospitals are filling up when we have an increase in COVID-19 in a particular geographic area. So freeing up hospital resources is very important. And therefore, that's led us to looking at administering remdesivir. Again, it's intravenously administered today, but even outside the hospital in an outpatient setting, in skilled nursing homes, where we know we have a big issue. So can we prevent patients from getting into the hospital to begin with, which of course would be ideal. And then we're looking at different formulations of remdesivir. We're looking at an ability for this to be delivered in an inhaled mechanism. It's not a compound that's suited for a pill or an oral mechanism today because of the way it's metabolized in the body. It's metabolized very quickly through the liver. but an inhaled mechanism that gets directly into the lungs, which is the greatest source of viral replication for the disease, is something that we have seen early results that are interesting, and we've actually just now started clinical trials with an inhaled version of this. So earlier in the treatment course is almost always better with antivirals, and combination can improve the benefits. That's the major thrust of our clinical trials. And to your point around clinical trial recruitment, of course, the good news is there's many, many medicines out there that are now in the hands of clinicians at hospitals and clinics around the world. And the most promising agents, I believe, are being very effective at recruiting patients. And we've certainly seen the recruitment in our trials go very fast.
Thank you very much indeed, and we'll wait for news of those combination therapy clinical trials that you've just been talking to us about. Let me now bring into the conversation Dr. Albert Bourla, CEO of Pfizer. Back in March, I think you had a 5-point plan, and 2 of those points were about applying your drug expertise and your SWAT teams. If you could briefly tell us what that is all about.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you for the invitation. And let me start by saying how proud I feel that I'm part of a panel of leaders that represent some of the most innovative companies in the world and some of the most scientific institutions that are battling this disease. As you know, every organization has a reason of existence. And in our case, the reason of existence, or our purpose, as we call it, is to bring breakthroughs that change patients' lives. So it's clearly when you are facing a situation like COVID-19 that is shocking everyone, with the consequences that it's having in the social life and in the health and economical life, you are driven by your purpose. And immediately we jump to see what can we offer to change people's lives in this setting. And Pfizer has end-to-end capabilities from early research all the way to late research, development, commercial, manufacturing in multiple fronts. But there were 2 that we felt that we could contribute. One was on therapeutics and the other was on vaccines. We jumped immediately when the sequence, the genome sequence of the virus was announced. We jumped immediately into our molecular database of multiple antiviral components that we have tested in the past, particularly in the period of 2003 when SARS was there. And we tried to see if there are compounds that we have studied, and we knew the pharmacodynamics of these compounds, if they can fit the genome sequence of this new virus. And pretty soon we identified few that they were promising, and we started immediately applying some discriminatory tests so that we can see which one of them they have much more promise. And then eventually we ended up with one that we believe has enough promise, and it is about to enter clinic. I believe we will be in the human trials this month. This is a different mechanism than remdesivir, which, to my knowledge, is the first molecule that was proven to be effective against COVID therapeutically in a study that it is randomized, controlled, I mean, in a proper study. And it could be as an alternative for people that they don't respond very well in remdesivir, or it could be a combination that also we are going to test, if together the 2 medicines would have better results than they want. More to hear about that. It is right now in the clinic, and if things are successful, we could have results before the end of the month to show how we are doing. And then, of course, next year, it is when we will have more pivotal studies like the ones that remdesivir did, so to prove if we are or not effective. The other area that we could also offer to the society was the development of a vaccine. And over there again, we jumped immediately. We had a collaboration with a German biotech company, BioNTech is called, which they are mastering the RNA technology in developing a vaccine for flu. So once COVID came up, we immediately talked to them and they talked to us, and we decided to start developing a vaccine because we felt that the mRNA technology is ideal technology for something like that. The collaboration went very well.
Sorry, I was just going to say, and where are you in that development of that vaccine with BioNTech?
No, thank you for the question. We are in a very advanced stage. We started end of July, the big pivotal trial, but it is the only trial that will tell us if we have an effective and safe vaccine or not. This is a trial that will complete it. We will have to enroll at least 30,000 participants to be able to come to a conclusion. Right now, we have enrolled yesterday 23,000 patients were already enrolled in the study. And a significant number of them already started getting the second dose of the vaccine. The way that the study works, it is that we randomize individuals in one-to-one, which means that 15,000 will receive the vaccine, 15,000 will receive a placebo, and then we are waiting to see if this population of 30,000 people will start getting disease. And the expectation, if the vaccine works, is that the people that are getting disease are coming from the group that didn't receive the vaccine. And those that receive the vaccine will have much less than those that they didn't in terms of disease. We expect to, by the end of October, normally, should be able to have enough events to say if the product works or not. And we have already worked all the rest of the file, so which means that how to make the vaccine, if the vaccine is safe, and we are going to start submitting to the FDA on a rolling base and to other regulatory agencies. So what I want to say is that if we have enough events, we may be able to say if the product is safe and efficacious in the October timeframe and submit immediately for approval or authorization.
That's very good news. I think everybody will be very heartened by that October deadline. Thank you very much. If I refocus our conversation, because of course Pfizer's taking a multifaceted approach with vaccines and therapeutics, let's focus now on therapeutics and Roche. And if I can bring in Severin to the discussion, because I know, Severin, that there were various developments when you were looking at Actemra, a rheumatoid arthritis drug. Can you tell us about those efforts to develop that drug as a therapeutic for COVID-19?
Right, so the idea with Actemra was that for severe COVID-19 pneumonia patients who very often suffer from an overreaction of the immune system, that Actemra could help to dampen the immune response and therefore improve the chances for those severely sick COVID-19 patients. We had a lot of anecdotes around that, feedback from physicians, and as a result of it, we started a very robust clinical trial, and unfortunately, the trial didn't read out positively. So unfortunately, Actemra on its own did not help those severely sick patients. So we are now working on combinations with other medicines. Dan O'Day from Gilead has already pointed out combination trials with remdesivir. So Actemra is one of the medicines which is now tested in combination with remdesivir. And we have to await results whether this combination brings any additional benefits. Beyond Actemra, we have also entered a collaboration with the company Regeneron And that is really about so-called antibody treatments. In this specific case, an antibodies cocktail of two antibodies. The hypothesis here is as follows. If people get infected with a virus, typically as part of your immune reaction, you develop an antibody after some time, and that antibody would then take care of the virus. We call those antibodies neutralizing antibodies. Now, the problem is that some patients would not develop antibodies in the first place. And also importantly, patients would often only develop antibodies or neutralizing antibodies at a relatively late stage. So the idea is that we give those patients antibodies immediately after they are diagnosed, in particular patients who are at higher risk, and hope that we can help those patients by doing that. In the best case, and we have another study running in this respect, we could even give it prophylactically for people who are highly exposed.
This all just shows, doesn't it, the importance of safe clinical trials, that things don't work always, but that you really do have to go through all stages of these clinical trials to make sure that the treatment is safe and effective.
Absolutely. I mean, there is no way that we can lower the standards in conducting our trials, and actually the results of those trials demonstrate the very point. You know, there was lots of people who thought that Actemra would be useful as a monotherapy, and only in a very robust, well-conducted trial we could show that it's actually not the case. So it demonstrates how important that is.
Thank you very, very much, Severin, for underscoring the importance of these safe and effective clinical trials. Let me bring in Ken from MSD. And I understand that you're working with a drug candidate, and I don't want to say its name because it's a bit of an alphabet soup. So I'm going to ask you to say its name. And I believe that it's an antiviral. And it's, again, it's a result of some cross-sector collaboration. So perhaps you can tell us more about the candidate and this collaboration.
Well, thank you. And I want to start by saying how pleased I am to be on this panel with my distinguished colleagues. I think collaboration will be the key to the solution. We've heard today that we don't believe that there will be a silver bullet, and that implies that we're going to need great cooperation and investment across this industry. And I'm very proud of the work that all the companies on this panel have done and others across the industry to address this public health crisis. I'm confident that all this work will ultimately prevail over COVID-19. But with respect specifically to the work that we're doing in collaboration with Therapeutics, we purposefully sought out at MSD promising antivirals that have the potential to address the pandemic sooner than a vaccine might. In collaboration with Ridgeback Biotherapeutics, we are advancing MK-4482, an orally available antiviral therapy which has obvious potential benefits in terms of ease of administration and alleviating the burden on our hospital systems. MK-4482 is currently under study in 3 different phase programs in outpatients as well as inpatients in the United States and the United Kingdom. Over the coming weeks, we expect to initiate 2 large pivotal trials, one in outpatients and the second in hospitalized patients with confirmed COVID-19. So we're moving with both urgency and diligence on the development of MK-4482 as well as our vaccine. And as several people said, and it is imperative that medicines or vaccines that are developed meet the time-tested standards of efficacy and safety. Partnerships have already been critical in establishing the current program, and even greater collaboration will be required pandemic. Again, our industry is playing a critical role in this response and is uniquely positioned to address this public health challenge on a global scale, and importantly, to prepare for similar threats in the future, which is something we must do. Thank you.
Ken, also just to check that I've heard correctly, this new candidate, this is for a different population. It's not for the people with severe symptoms of COVID, but those who are mildly affected. Is that right?
It would include people who are mildly affected. Our studies will be for people who are pre-hospitalization, that is outpatients. So those will be milder people. And we have a separate pivotal study for people who are hospitalized. And the hope is that we can prevent people who are hospitalized from progressing, for example, to an ICU setting.
Thank you for that clarification. I just wanted to check the audibility and that I had well understand what you said, but I think that just brings up and reinforces the point that Thomas made, that we need different solutions for different populations. Ken, thank you very much for those comments. Let me bring in Dave from Eli Lilly, because you're also looking at collaborations in researching and developing a treatment. Can you tell us what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe before I do that, just with the spirit of IFPMA, just want to comment here. I'm also pleased to be a part of this panel and the industry at this important time. Just to underscore a few key themes that have come up here, and I think are so important for media to understand, is the speed at which we're moving is truly unprecedented in the history of our industry, or frankly, in the face of any other disease. This is, as Albert said, a disease that was just genetically identified as a target 9 months ago. Already we have approved treatments, and we have a pipeline of, I believe, over 300 possible treatments, and of course, many vaccine candidates, as was discussed. The second theme is collaboration. You've heard that here, 2 different collaborations just discussed, but I can assure you that there's many, many more under discussion, some that have not worked out, some that continue, but this industry is collaborating in ways I haven't seen in my 25 years working in it. And finally, just to emphasize the points on the scientific rigor and the capability that this industry can bring to bear. Collectively, our industry spends more than all governments globally combined on R&D. The private sector is a powerful force to conquer disease, and I think we hold ourselves to very high scientific standards, as was discussed. And because of all those things, I believe we will make significant progress against the virus. We've already made a lot, and this will end because of science. This industry will be a big part of the solution. So as it relates to Lilly and collaboration, we have been focused on 2 pathways for treatment. One, repurposing medicines that we already had. We've discussed some of those approaches already. Ours is anti-inflammatory primarily. But then also inventing new drugs, in our case, neutralizing antibodies, to reduce the disease burden. In this case, we collaborated with 2 different biotech companies starting in early March. By the end of May, we had begun clinical trials, first in man, for neutralizing antibodies against COVID-19. And within a few weeks, we'll actually get data rolling out of those studies in the ambulatory setting. These are people who are infected but not yet hospitalized, with the goal being to prevent hospitalization and reduce the burden of disease before people become too sick. We also have 2 other major settings. We're looking at neutralizing antibodies either alone or in combination. We're looking at both. One is in the emergent situation, particularly in nursing homes, where you have an infected staff member or patient, and the risk of infecting other residents is very high, and the mortality is significant. I believe in the US, more than 40% of all deaths were in this setting. And so what we want to do is treat people with the antibodies if there's been one infection in a home and prevent its spread. So it's a sort of what's called passive immunization approach to protect people until our vaccination strategies fully come to light. The other approach is in hospital as well, and we're working with NIH on their hospitalization study, which is a platform study, again, a version of collaboration where many participants are neutralizing antibodies can join the same protocol, and then we could compare therapies in a registration quality effort led by the US NIH. So lots going on, and exciting weeks and months ahead as data comes in from these studies.
Thank you very much for that update, and thank you for gentlemen for giving us an update on the research and development and the clinical trials. We are going to be taking the journalist questions in about 15 minutes time, but before we do that, of course, you've all been talking to us about developing treatments, but you've got to manufacture them at capacity and you've got to get them to the people in need. So I'm going to just get your thoughts about that. We already heard from Dan about the Gilead approach, but I'll come back to you, Dan, for more on that in a moment. But Severin, if I can bring you in on, again, IFPMA, as you said, it didn't work out, but you must have put quite a lot of thinking into the planning for production and access to treatments while you were developing IFPMA, and I assume that you're also putting quite a lot of thought into your collaboration with Regeneron and how you are actually going to manufacture and get that sort of treatment to the people in need.
Right, it's a very important point. So if you take the example of neutralizing antibodies as a treatment, really the number one limitation we have is manufacturing capacities. And I'm talking about worldwide manufacturing capacities. And it's very difficult to scale up manufacturing capacities for antibodies. So Roche is actually the company with one of the biggest capacities for antibodies. A driver in this collaboration has been to help make the necessary production capacities available if one of those antibody treatments really works. I mean, just imagine what a tragedy it would be if every company would sit on its own manufacturing capacities and then one company finds a breakthrough therapy but is not able to produce it. And I really have to echo Dave's comments on the collaboration within the industry. I mean, this is unprecedented. I have never seen this in my entire career. Typically, we have fierce competitors, right? And we would not give away our manufacturing capacities. But in this very special situation, what we do is we look how we can bring all our resources and capabilities together. And antibodies is a very good example. So if this antibody cocktail is going to work, actually we can increase capacities by 3 to 4-fold by bringing in our capacities. And if this antibody cocktail should not work, which of course we don't hope, but if this is the case, then of course we will immediately look for collaborations with other players who are potentially bringing such new opportunities to patients, and we would then of course also come in and help with our respective capacities. So it's really pretty amazing, and I'm really proud of how the industry is coming together to work together to get our hands around this pandemic.
Thank you, Severin. Indeed, the key word that we've been hearing is collaboration between the industry and, as you say, between former rivals who are now working together. Dave Ricks, let me just ask you a question then about the regulators and how you're working with the regulators to speed up development.
Well, like the industry, they've responded and adapted their practices during the pandemic. I want to underscore something that's been discussed broadly over the last week or two, though, that this industry and certainly our company has no intention of pursuing approvals for products that we don't think meet the standard for safe and effective. I don't think the regulators are interested in that either, but there's been much discussion about it. I just want to emphasize that when we will publish all our data, we'll subject it to scientific scrutiny, and we would expect the regulators to follow the normal standard on that regard. That said, we're in a pandemic, so the process and procedures should be adjusted perhaps dramatically at this time. And I think we are seeing as an industry good engagement with FDA, EMA, et cetera. Just to give a short example, typically if you had what's called an IND, initial new drug application, you wanted to meet with the FDA about it, you would set up a meeting. It would take 2 to 3 months to get a date. You'd submit a complex briefing document. You'd have a meeting, and then maybe a month or two after that, minutes and conclusions of the meeting would be shared. In this environment, all of that is happening inside of 1 week. It's a COVID-related therapy. They'll meet with you in real time. We discuss the conclusions on the call. Emails are exchanged, and the next step is pursued. So the procedural innovation has been strong, and I think both the industry and the regulators get credit for adapting quickly under these conditions. And what we have to do, though, is assure the public trust and make sure that when we release medicines, as Dan talked about with remdesivir, as we might find with vaccines, Albert discussed, or with neutralizing antibodies, that it meets the scientific standard we're used to, which is randomized controlled trials that show proof of efficacy and safety in the context of a pandemic.
Thank you very much, Dave. Yes, and indeed for underlining that message about the safety and the effectiveness and going through the procedures that you all know in the industry works so well. Let me go back to Dan, because you were talking about this twin approach to researching and developing remdesivir, but also making sure that it was produced in the quantity that's needed for everybody who needs it. So the question is, now that it's been authorized, Dan, how are you going to meet what will be huge demand potentially?
Right, Claire. So, I mean, let me start with the concluding message, and then I'll build up to that. Thanks to the investment and the efforts and the partnerships, we will be in a position to meet global demand starting next month, which is pretty extraordinary. I think my colleagues have already spoken about collaboration. I just want to emphasize that there's nothing that's business as usual in terms of the industry's response to COVID. I mean, as Dave mentioned, it's been 9 months since we identified the disease. Let me put this into context with remdesivir. Remdesivir is a very complex manufacturing small molecule process. It took, at the beginning of this year in January, 12 months with more than 36 chemical steps, some that can't be done in parallel, in order to produce remdesivir. We started remdesivir's supply in January of this year at around 5,000 treatment courses. We expect to have more than 2 million treatment courses by the end of this year. That's more than a 40-fold increase in supply. Now, a couple of important things happened. Number one was, again, not normal for our industry to assume success. In other words, before we even had proof of concept that this was clinically going to be successful, we began investing in the manufacturing and supply chain and process development as if it was successful. I mean, that would not be possible for all the medicines that we collectively develop in the industry, because it's not a sustainable model. But we, like everything, we as an industry, and certainly Gilead, understands its responsibility here. And we knew what kind of a situation we were in. And so we were breaking down all kinds of process barriers in addition to collaborating. So the good news is that, thanks to the creativity of our scientists, we were able to take that 12-month cycle time from, start to finish of remdesivir, and we now have that down to 6 months. It's difficult to compress that further, because of chemical steps need time to happen. But I'm really honored and proud to be working with the colleagues at Gilead that were able in a very short period of time to significantly reduce that as well. And then the second, of course, issue is we can't do anything alone in this scale and magnitude. We have reached out and been working with more than 30 partners at all different elements of our supply chain. These are kind of precious and in some cases scarce materials that we're starting with. So it has to be done and coordinated effectively. And I'm really pleased. I mean, thanks, Albert. Pfizer is one of our more than 30 partners that's supporting us in one of the critical stages of the manufacturing of this. And that's allowed us to really ramp up and move to a situation where, of course, there's always ambiguity in exactly where this disease will go. But based upon our view of epidemiology today, we will be in a position starting next month to be able to meet real-time demand. And we have the investments in place to significantly expand beyond those 2 million doses as we go into 2021.
Dan, I will bring in Albert because I'm sure he wants to say something about the collaboration on manufacturing capacity in a moment. But if I could just ask you about price and how you've gone about setting a price for remdesivir.
Right. I think it falls into the same category of this is not business as usual. I think first and foremost, I think we all understand our responsibility here to patients and society, and it's a very unique and unprecedented time. So I think the first thing that I would mention is as we were starting to get the clinical trial results and we started to see the significant impact that remdesivir has on patients and society, the first thing we did is we decided to donate the entirety of our supply chain through the end of June. And the reason we did that, Claire, I think it was very important. We wanted to make sure that, price and access discussions were completely off the table at a time when the world was reeling and we were trying to make sure that we could get this medicine to patients in need. And then, once we better understood the clinical data, we also took another exceptional decision as a company, and we decided to price remdesivir well below the value and strike this balance between, pricing it at a level that would meet the lowest spending power of the developed countries, while ensuring that we can continue to invest in research and development, both for this pandemic and also future pandemics. We also had an approach to the developing world that has been tried and true at Gilead with HIV and hepatitis C. We immediately went to licensing remdesivir to 9 generic manufacturers at a no-cost basis to make and sell remdesivir for more than 127 countries. Nearly all are low-income and lower middle-income countries. And the technology transfers to those 9 generic manufacturers, I'm pleased to say, is complete, and the manufacturing supply is building up there. So we have this kind of dual approach based upon our responsibility. Extraordinary to think about the immediate savings that you can get from remdesivir in a hospital setting, pricing it well below that value, and making sure that we had continuity across developed countries and a different model for developing countries. So this was part of everything in our responsibility in terms of clinical trial approach, manufacturing, access. All of these things were done with the same philosophy, which is how can we help patients in need most immediately, and how do we get this medicine in the hands of those patients and clinicians as quickly as possible?
Thank you, Dan, for that. And let me bring in Albert about what Dan has just said, the unprecedented collaboration between two rivals on scaling up the manufacturing capacity of remdesivir. If you could shortly just say a few words about that, and whether you have managed to ensure the distribution of your other critical medicines at this time. And I know that Albert will most probably want to say something about that partnership. Albert, can I just ask you whether you can hear us? If I can ask you then a few quick words about that collaboration with Gilead on manufacturing capacity for remdesivir.
Yeah, look, Claire, in these unprecedented circumstances, the only rival is the virus, and the only competitor is time. And clearly, remdesivir was a very, very promising solution because it was the first and, to my knowledge, the only one that is authorized globally, at least, to combat this disease. And when it comes as a surprise to all of them, I'm sure also to Gilead, something like that, I'm sure they were never planning for the quantities that would be needed in a pandemic. And actually, the story is that our discussion with Dan started very early when we thought it's only a Chinese issue. I called him and I told him, Dan, I know you are working on China and you have a lot of capabilities in China. If you need it, it's yours. And then we put our manufacturing people together to see if they can do something. And eventually we came to this collaboration. One thing is science to develop a solution, and the other thing it is technology to be able to scale up in a manner that it is appropriate for a pandemic, so that the world will have access to vaccines, to therapeutics, to everything. To this, there is a need of collaboration, and there is a need to do exactly what Gilead did, to start producing and investing at risk without even knowing if your product will work or not, so that in case the product works, the world has already solutions. For example, we were discussing about our vaccine, but we don't know if the studies will be successful or not. We hope, and based on science, that will be successful, but only the end result will tell us. I can tell you that, and that will know likely in October. I can tell you that already we have manufactured hundreds of thousands of doses that are sitting in our warehouse, hoping that, and by the way, all the first doses have been manufactured in Tours in Belgium, in Europe, and hoping that the product will be successful. And if it is successful, as we continue manufacturing, we'll have enough to provide to the world. If not, we will write it off, and all we lose is money, and we move on.
Albert, thank you very much. I'm sure you will get lots of questions from the journalists about that collaboration and the vaccine. I am just going to go to Ken briefly about the challenge about meeting demands, but also getting the treatments to the people who need them most. If you, Ken, could say some words about how you are going to make sure that you get the treatments to those who really need them.
Well, I think, first of all, it's important to recognize that COVID-19 has been able to shine a light on the health disparities both within countries and between them, including a range of diseases that are associated with COVID-19 risk, and importantly, access to health care. The core priority of our company, which extends to our response to COVID-19, is advancing health equity. We're committed to ensuring global access to any SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19 medicine or vaccine that we develop. We will also address social determinants of health in the most vulnerable communities and patient populations. In the U.S., statistics show that COVID-19 is disproportionately impacting communities and underrepresented groups across the nation, with African Americans experiencing higher rates of serious infections than other groups. And globally, pre-existing inequalities within society are also exacerbating the impact of the disease in certain areas. So from our perspective, we have a long track record of making our medicines and vaccines accessible and affordable globally. We're committed to doing the same for any vaccines or medicines we develop for COVID-19. And as far as I'm concerned, as confident as we are in innovative science, we're also confident that together this industry will work to ensure that we make these medicines and vaccines available to the world, including, as our colleagues have already said, producing and manufacturing capacity to produce millions of doses of the drug at risk before the end of the year. So in the final analysis, I think it's really important for us to tackle the science problem, but it's also just as important for us to take on the challenges of manufacturing and distribution, including the last mile, recognizing that this is a global pandemic and none of us are truly safe from this disease until all of us are safe.
Thank you very, very much, Ken. And now let me go to the journalist questions. We've got more than 130 journalists who have joined us on this media briefing, and they've got many, many questions. So I'm going to give the floor to them. And Dan, we've got 3 questions for you. One is from FA, the Spanish agency. Spain has recently run out of remdesivir, and it was a big issue. Are you in a position to supply the orders you receive? Where is the gap? What about voluntary licensing this drug? So that's one question from F8, Dan. The second question is from Politico. When do you expect to have full authorization for remdesivir in the US and Europe and other jurisdictions? I can see you're writing these down. And the third one is from Geneva Health Files. In the past, Gilead has expressed the willingness to make all of its licenses publicly available, but has so far not done so for the remdesivir license. When will Gilead publish the license signed with generic companies? So I hope, Dan, that you've managed to write down all those three questions. Otherwise, I'll prompt you.
I tried. Yeah, please prompt me back as well. I think there's a common theme here that's really, really important. We, again, it comes back to our responsibility. We will do everything we can to make sure that we can produce as much remdesivir as possible and get it to patients. Now, what we need in order for that to happen is a coordinated global supply chain. So the concept of just licensing to everybody is not going to get more remdesivir at the end of the day. There is starting material here that has to be appropriately managed. It's a complex process that we have to make sure is done in a way that meets the standards of patients regardless of where you are in the world. And that's the approach we've taken with this concept of expanding our supply chain through more than 30 different partners around the globe. We've spared no, we have partners from Europe, from North America, from Asia, and we've really used the best of the best, combined with this concept of voluntary licensing to generic manufacturers. This makes sure that the chemicals needed to make this medicine are being put to use in the most efficient way to get it to patients around the globe. Now, the first question around Spain, yes, of course, we understand that we are not yet in a position to meet the real-time demand of medicines in every corner of the world. As I said, because of the investments that we took at the beginning of this year, which significantly expanded our capacity, we have kind of an exponential growth curve in the second half of this year. Remember, it's a 12-month process time that we've brought down to 6 months, but that 6-month process time started only around the end of the first quarter, beginning of the second quarter. So that's why you see this kind of exponential growth as we go into now September, October, November, and December. And so we've been working diligently with countries around the world, with governments to allocate remdesivir outside the United States based upon the epidemiology, where it is today. And of course, that's been a bit of an imperfect process up until now, which is why the capacity increase we have going from September to October should put us in a position to be able to satisfy both Spain's needs and other countries' needs around the world. I will say that we have an agreement with the European Commission to supply remdesivir starting now in September, and it's up to the European Commission to allocate within Europe where the disease is going. One of the challenges here is you want to make sure with a medicine like remdesivir that you don't have remdesivir sitting in hospitals where the disease is not spreading. You want to make sure it gets to the areas where the disease is spreading. I'm sure that's the case for many therapeutics. So we're working night and day to make sure that no patient goes without the opportunity to have remdesivir in a hospitalized setting. Claire, the second question, did I answer yet? I wrote my notes down here.
Yes, it was, when do you expect to have full authorization for remdesivir in the US and Europe and other jurisdictions?
Right, exactly. So, as you know, in the United States, we're under an emergency use authorization, but we have completed all the requirements for the FDA to review for full approval, and we expect that to take place in the coming months. They're moving very quickly on it. In Europe, of course, we have the conditional approval, which allows us to now administer throughout Europe. And as I said, we have more than 50 countries around the world, including Japan, countries in other parts of the world that have already approved it. So I think the approvals are moving very rapidly based upon the strength of the data the randomized clinical trials, and to Dave's point, I think we've seen regulatory authorities around the world move very speedily and quickly to make sure that we get remdesivir approved. And I hope on the third question, Claire, I've given an indication on why we believe this approach of a coordinated supply chain for the developed world, voluntary licensing for the developing world is absolutely the best approach to make sure it gets to patients around the globe.
And I don't know whether you can answer this very specific question about when you're going to publish the license signed with generic companies.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what the journalist is referring to here. We have the agreements in place with the generic companies. The tech transfers are complete, so they have everything they need to be able to produce, and in fact have already produced remdesivir. Nothing is getting in the way for our authorized generic manufacturers to produce this medicine.
Thank you very much. And I would just like to apologise because there are some sound issues that we're having. So if I could ask the CEOs to speak quite slowly and clearly so that helps understanding. But thank you very much, Dan, for those answers to those journalists. Let's stay with treatments. And this is a question, Severin, for you from the India Express. Despite trial results, Actemra continues to be prescribed in India for several patients. Shortage has been an issue, but recently the supply is hard to get. Has Roche reduced production or supply to India?
No. Actually, there is sufficient supply globally to provide Actemra for its main indication, which is rheumatoid arthritis. And of course, physicians, if they wish so, and if they feel that Actemra can also help COVID-19 patients in the specific setting, should be able to receive Actemra. So we can supply worldwide. So there might be a specific issue with a specific customer in India, but please let us know so that we can follow up. Overall, there's enough supply for Actemra.
Thank you very much. And staying with India, a journalist from the Economic Times, Ken, wants to know, how is the trial of MSD's antiviral drug for COVID progressing?
Well, I can tell you that it's progressing well, as I said earlier. We are evaluating it in phase 2 trials. We expect, based on what we know, to start pivotal trials later this month or early next month at the latest. So we're continuing to be very optimistic based on the data that we see. We tend not to put out data on a periodic basis until we feel that it's clinically meaningful. But I will say that we're optimistic based on the data we've seen thus far, and that's why we're going into larger scale trials later this month or early October.
Thank you. Later this month or early October is the answer there. There are two questions for Albert here on the authorization of vaccines. They're from Reuters and Bloomberg. From Reuters, Albert, how is recruitment for your vaccine trial progressing? Are you still on track for data from that trial in October? Do you have any idea how soon you could see authorization for the vaccine in the US? How soon could we see authorization for the vaccine in other countries? So I'll just pause there. That's the question from Reuters. The question from Bloomberg, Albert, is if there is an emergency use authorization for your vaccine or another vaccine this fall, how can you know anything about the durability of the response if you're talking about just a few weeks of follow-up? So those two questions, again, Albert, if you need me to prompt you on them, please let me know. But those questions on the authorization of your vaccine.
Yes, thank you for the both questions. The first one, the recruitment is progressing ahead actually of our plans slightly. We are having right now 125 sites that are recruiting patients in a study that's conducted mainly in the US, Argentina, and Brazil, with the vast majority in the US. We have already recruited 23,000 patients as of yesterday, and we expect to have 30,000 in a few days, actually, given how fast. So when we can expect results from this study has to do with two things. One, how fast can we execute ourselves? And to this end, I think I'm very satisfied with the work of our scientists. They have been able to create very quickly a very big pool of people that we are going to see if the product works or not. But then also depends on how severe the disease will be in the places that we have vaccinated. And although we selected places that the attack rate, means the disease rate, is high, so that the vaccine can be tested in hard conditions, in places that really there is a lot of disease, we need to wait and see how many events and how quickly we have. Based on our calculations, we are expecting that to be in October, and we will have to wait and see. Now, on the second part, when can we receive authorization? I think this is FDA's and EMA's and the Japanese authorities and every other authority in the world job to do that, and this is they can only provide the answer. We believe, based on our discussions with them, that if we have a successful phase 3 study, that this is something that they will likely be good enough for them to provide us regulatory authorizations, maybe medicine in the beginning before we receive the final approval. So it depends on the study. It comes down to that again. As regards the durability, it's an excellent question. I don't think we know right now if the people that will get the vaccine will develop immunity that will last for life, will last for 5 years, or that will last for a year. And based on all the scenarios, it could be either the general population, or it could be that parts of the population will be in need of recurrent vaccination, maybe annual, maybe every 2 years. But that we can only know once we follow up enough those patients. In our 30,000 studied patients, we plan to follow them for at least 2 years. So we will know as time comes by if there will be a need for revaccinations because either the durability is not that strong. And of course, there is always the case that the virus mutates, and we need to have some adaptations to the vaccine. The good news is that with mRNA technology, you can achieve both. One, if there is a need to have annual revaccination, you can do that because you can boost as many times as is needed. And if there is a mutation of the virus and we need to tweak the vaccine, also the technology is very quick and will allow us to do that in a very efficient and a quick manner.
Thank you very much, Albert. We've now got some questions on vaccine confidence. We know how important that is, that when this vaccine or vaccines arrive, that it is safe and effective, which is absolutely key. The first question is for you, Dave. It's from Health Industry Hub Australia. The accelerated vaccine development timelines are condensed significantly compared to the traditional vaccine development timelines. How do companies ensure patient safety while accelerating the process to meet global needs?
I appreciate you directing the question to me. We're not developing directly vaccines. I mean, in general, I think, as I've said, the industry is committed to holding the highest standards of scientific integrity, and in the context of a pandemic, ensuring safety and efficacy. But maybe Ken or Albert should comment because their companies are working directly on vaccines.
Absolutely. Let me bring in Ken, if I may.
So the issue of vaccine confidence is a critical one. It is not just an issue related to COVID-19. We have seen in the wake of the pandemic that vaccinations for diseases like measles have fallen off, in part because people are worried about the safety of vaccines in general. I think at the end of the day, the most important thing for us to do is to reinforce to the public our commitment to safety as the number one thing. I think we all understand the need to move with urgency given the pandemic, but we will not sacrifice safety under any set of circumstances. I think we should also point out that we will not submit for approval, that is emergency use approval or more general approval, any vaccine candidate before we have a quantum of proof through phase 3 studies that allows us to make a reasonable estimation of what the safety and efficacy of that vaccine candidate will do for a larger population. So I think this is a very important issue that you touched on. I think it is unfortunate that loss of trust in societal institutions, we've gotten a great deal of skepticism. And I think it's important for our industry, again, to reinforce our commitment to first do no harm.
Thank you very much, Ken. And
Claire,
of course,
maybe if I could...
Yes, absolutely, Albert, because you're developing the vaccine with BioNTech. I'm sure that you would like to say something also about vaccine confidence.
Just to echo everything that Ken has said. The second is that I understand those that they are skeptical. And they are skeptical because there's so much politicized the science right now that many people will feel that for the sake of political gains or not gains, vaccines will be submitted or not submitted. And this is the worst situation that the society can be in. I want to assure everyone that, first of all, we do not have any political pressures, and it's irrelevant because, as Ken said, we will never ourselves submit for authorization or approval any vaccine before we feel that it is safe and effective. Pfizer, I took over last year. It was the 170th anniversary of the company. It's a long institution, and I don't plan to reduce the reputation of the institution just in a year or two. We will not cut corners. Our phase 3 study will be the only one that will allow us to say if we have an effective and safe vaccine. If we don't have results from the phase 3 study, we will not submit neither for approval nor for authorization, as Ken said just now. And I think that's something that I'm sure most of the reliable companies will do that.
Thank you, Albert, Ken, and also Dave for giving, I think, what is the IFPMA position on that. I think that message is loud and clear. Let me move on to a question on the WHO's COVID-19 Technology Access Pool. I'm going to ask it to Thomas, but if any of you would like to answer it too, please raise your hand. The question is, it's good that the industry is willing to collaborate on improving global production capacity. Why then not collaborate with WHO's CTAP to share the knowledge and try and find even more production capacity globally? Thomas.
Very much, Claire, but I'm sure that every single one of the CEOs could also respond because this has come up in the past. And basically, when you look at it, I think there's a responsibility for the companies to ensure the quality of their products, treatments or vaccines. And there you want to have some control, as we heard from Dan, as we heard from others. There's a lot of collaboration and there's an amazing number of volunteer licensing. The companies have worked, for example, with Medicines Patent Pool or reached out to existing partnership. I've never seen something as we have had now between a Gilead and a Pfizer, a Regeneron and a Roche. Therefore, it's happening. The issue about the CTAP, this technology, there are existing tools and mechanisms. Companies use the bilateral voluntary licensing. They do talk to the medicines patent pool and others. It's happening, and therefore it didn't get much traction.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen, I see that you are most probably all of one mind in what Thomas has just said, unless you tell me otherwise on that. I will also then have another question on this technology access pool. Thomas, what are the specific reservations against participating in the TAP?
It's really basically, it's something which would have been built up from scratch. And so far it's a bit of an empty shell. Whereas what we heard from the companies is happening. We, for example, as IFPMA, we are representing the companies in the ACT Accelerator. We are very active in the COVAX facility. And there, for example, we have a partnership. On the one hand, you have the innovative big pharma companies or vaccine manufacturers. On the other hand, you have the established developing country vaccine manufacturers. What I see in there, we are like-minded. We work hand in hand. We have the same concerns about the logistics. We have the same interest in regulatory standards. Therefore, the partnership is happening. What I see also on therapeutics treatment, you have an excellent collaboration which is hosted by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They play a really big role together with the Wellcome Trust. All of the companies we have on here, they are involved there. They are basically, I've recently heard one of the most renowned public health experts in the world ask, what would you wish the industry to do? And the reaction was, actually right now they're doing as I always hoped they would do at such a moment of crisis.
Thank you very much. Dan, there's another question for you from a journalist in India. Some countries like the US have managed to cut deals with your company to buy up the bulk of your supplies. Explain what kind of deals are being done for countries that want to buy up a bulk of your supply. What are they offering your company that they can buy up a bulk of your supply?
I appreciate the question. I mean, let me start by saying that we're a global company that is focused on global supply at the end of the day. Now, as we started to have increased supply over the summer months, we had discussions with the U.S. government, and we agreed to supply a significant amount of our supply of remdesivir to the U.S. At that time, that was probably some of the highest epidemiology incidents in the world, and there were significant needs in the United States. At the same time, already over the summer months, and that will only continue as our supply increases in October, we have been working with countries around the world, lots of requests. You can imagine how many requests we get in. And we're doing our best to, first of all, triage those requests based upon is the disease circulating in that country at this stage, and if so, at what level? So really following the science, following epidemiology, and then working government by government. As I said, the more that we can work with health officials in different parts of the world, the better. That's why, of course, we have the relationship with the Department of Health and Human Services here in the United States, who then allocate to states, and states then to hospitals. Those health authorities are in the best position to determine where the medicine needs to go at a particular time. And it's really done on a daily and a weekly basis. And likewise, we have that same arrangement now with the European Commission for all the countries in Europe, including the UK, where they will also then monitor the course of the disease. Likewise, with countries outside of the US and Europe, we've been pursuing the same approach. So as we go into now increased supply in October, November, December, and beyond, we'll continue to pursue that approach. First of all, be guided by where the disease is, be guided by public health officials, and then with the increasing supply, be in a much better position to be able to make sure that we can satisfy all those demands as they come in.
Thank you. Lots of questions about access to vaccines. A question, Albert, for you from DevEx. Has Pfizer made any commitments in terms of dose guarantees of its candidate vaccine to the Gavi-led COVAX facility, which Thomas has just mentioned? If yes, can you tell us how much? If not yet, why?
We are in very intense discussion with the facility with Gavi, and we have an approach that we would like to provide to them doses, if we are successful with our vaccine, at a very low cost. But we haven't concluded this agreement.
So I think that is watch this space, because negotiations are ongoing. Thank you, Albert. A question for Thomas here from the Indian Express. With the pandemic affecting a huge population and vaccine a priority for high-risk countries, what steps are manufacturers taking to scale down cost? In a country like India, which has a huge population, affordability is a major concern for the social economic backward strata of society. Can you also discuss the challenges that as an industry you face? So yes, costs for a country like India. Thomas, are you able to enlighten us there?
Actually, India is one of the countries with probably some of the biggest manufacturing capacities for vaccines. Therefore, when you look at the COVAX facility, I would expect that India will join that facility, but basically India will first look to make sure that the Indian citizens will get vaccines, and I'm sure they will get vaccines at the lowest cost possible. But the challenge, of course, in terms of the no one left behind is what we need is a solidarity between high-income countries, upper-middle-income countries, and low-income countries. Basically, I'm cautiously optimistic. When you read the media just the other few days, you might be pessimistic that this facility, which was created to service in particular low and middle income countries, might not be able to do the job. I'm actually, based on what I hear, optimistic that it will be able to meet at least the 2 billion doses target for next year, maybe even more. What Albert just said makes me even more optimistic. It already has pretty much the largest portfolio of vaccine candidates, but crucial importance is you need a combination of rich countries. We have heard this week Japan, the European Union, Germany, the UK indicated they want to support the facility. On the other hand, we heard the US does not want to join. Therefore, we had mixed news, good news and not so good news. But at the end of the day, the manufacturer are clearly committed to available, accessible and affordable. And we talked about this at another media briefing. Nobody sees this as business as usual. We heard it from Dan, we have heard it from Albert, and we have heard from Ken how concerned he is about the inequalities. Therefore, the industry, I think, is really doing whatever it can, but you do need support also from high-income countries to cross-subsidize low-income countries. Otherwise, it will not work.
Thank you. Reuters has a question for you, Ken, and there's an apology if you've already answered it, but as you know, we've had a few sound issues. So the question from Reuters, Ken, is when do you expect the vaccine Merck is developing will begin clinical trials? Do you have any data from animal testing yet for that vaccine candidate?
Actually, here at Merck, we're working on two separate vaccine platforms. The first one is a VSV platform, vesicular stomatitis virus platform, which we were able to use successfully for our Ebola vaccine, our Ebola virus vaccine, which was approved both by the FDA as well as EMA and various African countries. So we have success with that particular platform. Secondarily, we are also working on a vaccine that uses a measles virus vector for a platform. And so both of those are going forward. We expect to be able to start larger scale human trials in the measles virus vaccine fairly soon. And we expect to be able to start those clinical trials for the PSV platform later this year. As I said, with respect to our antiviral, at Merck, we think it's best not to put out too much data for the data that we believe are clinically meaningful. And when we have clinically meaningful data, we will share it with the public. But I'll say again, we're encouraged by what we see clinically in both of those vaccines.
Let me then now ask a couple of questions as we wind up on this issue of emergency use authorization. And let me start with Albert. This is from Scrip. Do you consider it necessary to have extra transparency measures around any emergency use authorization or accelerated approval of a vaccine, e.g. a dedicated public FDA advisory committee meeting? If I can ask Albert that, and then I'll go to Ken, and if anybody else wants to answer, please do. So Albert, about extra transparency measures around an emergency use authorization or accelerated approval of a vaccine.
I'm very much in favor of extra transparency. The use or not of an advisory committee is a prerogative of FDA. They are the ones who should make the decision. I would be very supportive to use an advisory committee because we need this extra transparency. And to my knowledge, this is the intention of FDA because they have announced already one for October 22nd that will take place. So my answer is transparency is very critical and should be respected by all.
Thank you very much. Ken, yes, please. I was going to bring you back in again on that one.
Very briefly, I think to all science is transparency of data. I think particularly as we talked about with public concern about vaccine safety in the context of COVID-19, I think it is particularly important to make sure that the data that forms the basis for an application for emergency use authorization is fully available, it is public, it gets reviewed not only by FDA, but by any advisory committee that gets in place. And the scientific community can actually pour through that data and assure the public that it has been looked at objectively and that to the greatest extent, we can say, based on that data, it is appropriate to seek the use of this vaccine in large numbers of people.
So I think that was a definite yes to your question there about the need for transparency measures. Ken, if I can go back to you again, there's a question here about what is your opinion about the emergency use authorization for COVID-19 convalescent plasma therapy in the US? Do you think data is strong enough to support an EUA, an emergency use authorization?
Well, I will say that I haven't studied the data closely myself. I know there's a controversy about that, but I would rely on scientific and medical voices to give a better answer than I can sitting here now. I will say also that one of the problems that we have is there are too many commentators about science without people who have the right requisite scientific and medical background having their voices heard. So I don't want to contribute to that.
Thank you very much, Ken. And indeed, yes, please.
Larry, can I just...
Dan, do.
And then Dave. I wouldn't speculate. I wouldn't speculate on someone else's emergency use authorization. I don't think that's appropriate for us to do here. But having received an emergency use authorization, Gilead, with remdesivir, I just want to assure people it was a very thorough process. It was provided only after scientific evidence at an interim result of a randomized placebo-controlled trial showed that remdesivir significantly reduced the burden of COVID on patients in a hospitalized setting and got them out of the hospital sooner. That data has all been peer-reviewed, published to Kenneth's point, and I just want to emphasize that the process was complete, thorough, transparent, and now we're at the full FDA. So I can only speak to my own experience working with the EUA in the United States and the FDA.
Thank you, Dan. And I know that Dave from Eli Lilly had raised your hand on that one too and would like to make a comment.
Well, I think it's important when we're talking about confidence, process, et cetera, but that is not the only standard we subject from the industry. By the way, this is true before the pandemic, it'll be true after it, which is that we first meet our own standards for safety and efficacy, which are high. And for most areas of study in this industry, including a virus, include randomized controlled studies that are large enough to detect differences. And that is something I know every member in our organization believes in. We, of course, have regulators who opine on that. There's another important group here, and you spoke about transparency, which is the scientific community. Ken touched on this, but to be a part of IFPMA, you need to commit to publish scientific results and subject them to third-party scientific scrutiny, as it was discussed with remdesivir, has been done. And I think it's still too early in the convalescent story to have that all played out. But I just want to assure people that manufacturers in our association are committed to all of those things. Our scientific standards, to subject ourselves to our own scrutiny, forced to work with regulators, but also there's the community of science that needs to opine. And all of the medicines, vaccines, we will publish those results, and the world can see for themselves what the effects are, and then weigh their use patient by patient. That's an important part of the process as well.
Thank you very much. I would like to say thank you to the CEO of Eli Lilly, Roche Group, Pfizer, MSD, and Gilead for joining us. Apologize for the sound quality, which was not optimal, and I hope, journalists, that you were able to get the information from the questions that you asked. Just to wind up, I would like to go back to Thomas for his final remarks.
Thank you very much, Claire, and I think I can be very brief. What we have heard from all the CEOs, I think, is a remarkable alignment in terms of commitment to randomized controlled clinical trials, to the highest standards of regulatory science. What we've heard is it has been amazing how regulatory agencies, be it the FDA, EMA, or others, have adapted to the need to speed up the work without compromising quality. From the industry, and I think we have heard it more than once, this is a period where an extraordinary amount of transparency is required. We have seen occasionally your expectation is not fulfilled, but you publish the results, good or bad, and the industry is fully committed, and I think this is most important in the area of vaccines, because we are all concerned about anti-vax movement, about confidence in vaccine, and that's why what we heard about we do want the agencies to fulfill the highest possible standards. The other remarkable example is really a unique amount of partnership and collaboration, because the company is also really concerned about access, about inequality, about scaling up, and therefore we have never before seen that kind and heard, if it doesn't work for the partnership which we signed, maybe it works for another one. I'm willing. Albert, I think, was one of the first ones who's committed to sharing manufacturing capacity. I was asked at that time, are they really serious? Isn't this just lip service? I think 6 months later, we learned it is serious. And companies are doing, be it on treatment, be it on tests, be it on vaccines, 24/7, all out to make it work.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Thank you for the journalists for sending in your questions. Thank you for our CEOs for giving up their valuable time to talk to us about research and development on treatments. And of course, vaccines is always top of mind, just as Thomas said. You can find the recording on the website of IFPMA. So please stay well, stay safe. Thank you very much.